Quite. We still have this exciting event for you here at the old fire station, other stuff going on elsewhere, and of course our big event at the Big Black Box tonight. But for present purposes, we've got two amazing fiction writers on stage with us this afternoon, both of whom, both from Trinidad and Tobago. Celeste Mohammed is our 2022 OCM Bocas Prize winner. We've done lots of stuff with Celeste over the past couple of years, but it's all been online and virtual, really. So this is the first time we've had her here in the old fire station stage since the book was even published, much less since she won the prize. So we're happy to have her here, and also happy to have Kevin Jared Hosein here with us. I think everybody knows, Hungry Ghost. It's been such a success this year. I'm not going to give you any detailed introductions, because instead I'm going to hand over to the host of the session to do that. We're very happy to have, I think, your first Bocas ever.
Virtual, but
okay, first in-person Bocas ever, Lisa Auta, who is a Guyanese-born, currently based not in Guyana, literary scholar. She's the managing editor of the Journal of West Indian Literature, fondly known as JWIL. She's one of the judges for this year's OCM Bocas Prize. We're very happy to have her here on the festival stage for the first time. I'm going to hand over to her now to run this conversation, and all I'll say is just give them another round of applause to get them started, and off we go.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, and thank you for having us here, and thank you all for staying to the end of a very, very full day. I wanted to just say we're having, we're not focusing on reading, although maybe the opportunity might arise. We're going to have a conversation about some of the links between these two amazing books, and then we're going to leave some time for you all to ask questions. So I first want to introduce our authors in a little bit more detail. We have Kevin Jared Hosein, who is an author and a science teacher, which I love to see that effects of your biology background reflected in Hungry Ghost. But born and raised in Chaguanas, and he's a two-time winner of the Commonwealth Short Story Prize for the Caribbean. His books include The Beast of Kokyo, the winner of a Burt Award for Caribbean Literature, The Repenters, which was longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Prize, and the OCM Bocas Prize, and Little Town Secrets. His writings have been published in numerous anthologies and outlets, including Lightspeed Magazine, Wasafari, BBC Radio 4. And this newest novel, which hopefully some of you have read, or if not, you'll be looking for here, was just published in February 2023, both in the UK and the Commonwealth and in North America. And Kevin, I also wanted to say we met in 2015 when he read for an Indo-Caribbean feminist thought symposium that Gabrielle Hussein and I organized here in Trinidad. And at the time, you were considered an emerging writer, but though I think that term was already a misnomer in 2015 because you were already earning awards for your writing. Celeste Mohammed, who I'm very happy to be in conversation with today, is a Trinidadian lawyer turned writer, and her debut novel in stories, Pleasantview, which is, you will know, won the Bocas Prize, the overall Bocas Prize last year. It has also been the 2022 CLMP Firecracker Award for Fiction, and it was a finalist for the UK Society of Authors McKitterick Prize. Celeste holds an MFA in creative writing from Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she received a 2018 Penn Robert J. Dow Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers. So thank you both for being here with us today. I first want to congratulate both of you on the magnificent world building that you both did with Pleasantview and Hungry Ghost. It was an absolute pleasure for me to live in these worlds for the weeks that and in the landscapes with these unforgettable characters that you created for us, even though it could be emotionally harrowing at times with both of your work. So to start us off, I wondered if perhaps you could talk us a little bit through or reflect a bit on the time periods that you chose for each of these respective works. For Kevin, I was struck by the fact that you chose the 1940s and chose to return to a moment when many, especially in the Indo-Caribbean community, were still living quite close to the conditions of indentureship although you're, as you put it quite beautifully, there were folks living in barracks, but they were also living, quote, quite close to the dogma of a new world, howling and preaching steel. That was very much within sight. And Celeste, for you, you opted for such a contemporary setting, one which is so wedded to realism that sometimes it feels like these stories could be the ones that we're glimpsing out of our windows or from cars as we drive by. So could you talk a little bit about the particular truths that you wanted to evoke about Trinidad and about the region's past, presence, perhaps potential futures that you were trying to evoke by choosing these particular moments to focus on in your work?
So something that struck me when, before I was writing Hungry Ghosts is, if you had to go to UE, you have to cross the Churchill-Roosevelt Highway. And for some reason, in my 3 to 4 years of going to that university, and I don't know how much years of traversing that highway, I never really thought about why it was called Churchill-Roosevelt Highway. And I was reading an article by, I think he's from the Express, Richard Charan, and he was talking about people in a family in Chaguaramas who was driven out during World War II when there was American occupation in the Northwest Peninsula, and they kind of lost everything. And that was something that I knew that they occupied there, but I didn't really think about everyone who was displaced from that peninsula, and that highway was built specifically to transport war supplies between the two bases, and it wasn't really for civilian use. And I was thinking, well, there's a lot that is just in plain sight in Trinidad that is not really even all talked about. So I all talked to my grandparents and some elders from my village to just find out what are some of the things that you all didn't want to all talk about with me. And so from that day, I began building the world. Of course, I didn't live through the 1940s, but there was a sort of mood and atmosphere that they spoke about when rebuilding this visual in my head. That's more what I was focused on capturing. And it seemed like, at that time, just nobody knew what was happening, nobody knew what was going on. And it seemed like a scary new world was emerging. And I think my idea was to bring that into a kind of visceral life, like things that we just see in plain sight and or remnants of it, to have it at least fully formed in some kind of apparitional form in this book.
So Lisa, when we chatted outside, I said I couldn't think of what there was in common, but Kevin is talking about the American occupation and the Churchill-Roosevelt Highway and the displacement of families. And actually, the last time I was here at Bocas, it was to read from a story I had written about that. So I was also inspired by that concept of the displacement and where did these people go and what happened to their families, and so that is a link I wasn't aware of. As far as Pleasantview is concerned, in my mind, it was the 1990s. So not totally contemporary, but near enough, right? If you notice, there are no cell phones in the book, right? When Luther calls home, he has to call using a phone card on the house phone and stuff. So I wanted it to be pre the invasion of technology, because with the cell phones and the social media and the World Wide Web, the world got smaller. So I wanted to be that period between the 80s, when everything just went, haywire in Trinidad after the oil boom, the depression. And between that and the 2000s and the other boom and all of that. So there was this period, this very depressed period, where a lot of people went to the US. A lot of families suffered. You have the box and barrel generation, right? And it was really that story, 6 months, that set the time period for me, and everything else sort of evolved out of that.
It's very interesting what you're Yeah, what you're both saying, because it's evoking for me the question of how it is that we think about modernity and modernity in this context, right? So it's interesting. There's a version of it, a myth around what it was as it was emerging in the 40s, especially shaped in relationship to the U.S. and the U.S. presence, but also, as you're saying, this, being on the cusp of this moment of so much else coming in via technology. So maybe we can linger a little bit on that question of myth and mythologies, because for me, that was also a link that I saw between some of your work, and especially, Celeste, for you, where you speak about Pleasantview as being a response or speaking back against particular types of myths and myth-making that go along with reception or perceptions of the region. And Kevin, for you, obviously, there are various forms of mythologies that you're building into the lives of the characters and the landscape that you're evoking. Local ones, faith-based ones, more ancient ones, with the twins, for example, and various texts and so on. So I was wondering if there was something you'd like to say to us about the role that you each see about myths and mythologies playing into life in the region, and the way in which we perhaps experience it versus how an outsider viewer or reader, in your case, as people are receiving these texts, might be engaging.
I went first last.
Yes, go
I was hoping you would just be a pushover and go again.
You can also redirect to other things that you'd like to say about ideas around myths. So.
Well, in my current work that I'm working on, it really highlights, in my mind, in Trinidad, I don't know about other Caribbean countries, but in Trinidad and Tobago, superstition, folklore, myth, religion, and reality exist on the same plane. It just depends on who you're talking to, And I didn't realize that until, because, you're born into that, and I didn't realize that until I was an adult and had opportunities to speak to people from different cultures. And I realized how absolutely weird it is that I could be talking to another person, very educated, and we would be like, yeah, so happened on the news, whatever. And look, I wake up with this bruise, I think Sukuya sucked me last night. It's like, and and for us, it's all reality. It could totally happen. So yeah, all of those things, and I think Kevin's book shows that reality is really very fluid here. As regards myths about the Caribbean, it irritates me no end. It has always irritated me, and even more so since Pleasantview has come out, to come up against what has been called paradise discourse. Island stories are supposed to be a certain type of story. It's supposed to give the reader a certain type of feeling, yeah? And the lens is supposed to be, Caribbean people, particularly Caribbean women, are supposed to be viewed with a particular lens, and we're supposed to write a particular type of fiction or writing, right? So Pleasantview, for me, was very much an attempt to say no. For those of us who live here, it is not very often, it doesn't feel like a paradise. And I feel like I don't owe anyone a responsibility to couch my reality in such a way to make you feel good. The purpose of literature belongs to the people, the literature of a place belongs to the people, and there's so much that we have to work out among ourselves in the Caribbean and in Trinidad. We can't if we can't write about it freely.
You know what I think is one of the biggest mythological figures in Trinidad? Money. Money. And having it, and wanting it, and desiring it. And not just money, all money. Because, to quote an epigraph that began The Godfather from Balzac, behind every great fortune is a crime. Right, and the things that started Trinidad the new Trinidad, the new world, as they're saying, were all crimes. And I wanted to examine that and the victims of those crimes, because there were several myths that I wanted to put. Of course, there's Hindu mythology in there, which I wouldn't get too much into, but there's some allegories that could be made of the Ramayana with Rava and the King of Lanka and things like that. I wouldn't get too much into that. I'll stick to Trinidad. But my thing was money back then. Money back then, money now, money that existed before back then. And the people that did not have money who wanted that money. And that's essentially what this book is kind of about. And the toppling of empires and the toppling of the small people beneath those empires that could happen with that. And it wasn't just that, it was also to dispel certain myths, because when I was interviewing some elders and I was asking them what it was like to be in school at that time in the 1940s. Did the British blaze your tail? Did they cut your ass and put you to kneel down on jagged rocks? And I was like, no, that was the locals who made us do that. The British actually treated us really well, because, or the Canadians, whichever missionaries, because they did like this hypnotic coercion to bring them into Christianity. And there was this myth, that's sold that they were the only enemy. They were one enemy, and then we became our own enemy because of that. And in some senses, we are still our own enemy. And that was kind of like one of the myths that I also wanted to explore. All money, the effects of that money, and wanting so bad to have it. And to the point that it drives us to become our own enemies.
I think you do such a wonderful job of that with Changor, building that into the story. The people who are in the process of inventing this mythology around being established, around wealth, around changing names, really. And you hint a little bit about that forced conversion in order to be able to access that wealth that often went along with figures like Hans and so on. So in keeping with this idea of dispelling myth, one of the things that you're touching on, Celeste, this idea of the paradise discourse that often is imposed on the region, the idea of this being a place where other people escape to, right? They escape from their lives. I noticed also the theme of marronage that was marking both of your works in common, right? Characters who are trying in some ways to escape from conditions, and you open with that wonderful story that's all about trying to get off an island. It wasn't Trinidad, but a metaphorical island, a metaphor for so much that's contained within the books. And Kevin, you have several characters who, towards the end, are imagining other spaces from which they could escape, or they could start new worlds. So, just wondering about that kind of theme working through, and the whether there's that, what those possibilities are for each of the worldviews that you put forth, right? Are these new spaces that that can be escaped to? Are there different kinds of ways in which you'd like to imagine the possibilities for different paths or different worlds opening up in the work that you've presented to us?
Can I get a question? I just one.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
This is maybe just talk through the idea of the possibilities of escape from the types of world. What are the versions of escape that are possible?
Yeah. So as I was coming back before, a lot of the main characters, they were in search of upward mobility, and that would have been one of the main families in Hungry Ghosts, which have been Shweta and Hans Sarup. And really that is kind of what started to trigger the downfall, because it is, what exactly will you do for $400? Well, back then, what exactly will you do? Are you willing to sacrifice a member of your family? Are you willing to sacrifice yourself? Are you willing to sacrifice your marriage? Are you willing to sacrifice your child for $400? So it's in order to move from this barrack yard into this village that really does not like you at all. And that was like one of the main questions in my mind. What are you willing to do? And it is also, inviting the audience as well to see the deplorable conditions of the barrack, if you were living in that. Rats in the rafters, cockroaches in the rice, no privacy whatsoever, walls don't even reach up to the ceiling. Will you do that for $400? And in a sense now, there's a cycle of mistrust and violence that is created, not just between human to human, but human to animal and animal to human. And the cycle seems pretty much never ending until, I wouldn't spoil the story, until some of the characters who you may think are the most violent are the ones that actually seem to stop the cycle of violence by simply not subscribing to that kind of monetary desire. They just said, we want peace, we just want to walk away. And those are the ones that actually just escape from the situation.
And those are the ones who seem most attuned to nature as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe islands make fantastic prisons. That's why we have Alcatraz. That's why we have Carrera. It's hard to escape an island. And it's possible to grow too big for an island, to have your ambitions exceed the capacity of the island. And if Trinidadians are known for anything, it is our ambition. We are people who we try. We're always trying. Everybody's trying to get somewhere, get ahead. And everybody in Pleasantview is trying to escape a metaphorical island in some ways. The first story, a real island, but metaphorical island. And for me, when I read, I feel like I respect characters most for trying, even if they don't actually succeed. And I always kind of chuckle to myself when people say there are no happy endings in Pleasantview, because for me there are. To see some of the characters try and come up to places in themselves and then surpass a limit that was set before. So like Omar, what he does at the end, for me that's a happy ending, right? He's gone past a limit. Even in the story Home, what happens in the end, her decision to go home, for me is a happy ending. So it really depends on how you view it, but everybody in Pleasantview is trying to escape an island.
I really like that you leave us thinking about Omar and that ending too, right? Because the other theme that both of you were picking up, or I found present in both of your works, is how do you break these cycles of the things that we inherit? And obviously, both of your books explore in such vivid fashion the terrain of cycles of gendered violence, of norms, harmful norms around gender, around parent-child relationships where parents are so wounded by traumas that they've experienced that they're unable to guide their children across terrains that they then need to navigate. And so there's so much that we could talk about that, but I wanted to maybe narrow down to something that I noticed that both of you were emphasizing through various characters, which was the father-child relationship and various versions of masculinity that were playing out in both potentially hopeful ways, but also potentially harmful ones. Kevin, you were ending with the idea of the twins, the characters who perhaps were the ones who are the greatest potential inheritors of crime and violence and a very toxic version of masculinity, as being ones who are trying the hardest to break that cycle. So maybe we can just think through a little, because the Omar character for me is such a complex one, because it's both a moment of a substitute father who could potentially break the cycle, but it's also, the kiss on the forehead is also a potential Judas kiss, right? That leads one into a different world. So maybe a little bit we could discuss the kinds of discourses around masculinity or around gender norms that you potentially were trying to disrupt with these representations?
Sure. Another thing that I don't know if people notice is that most of the stories in Pleasantview, people focus on how the women are so badly treated, not realizing most of the stories are actually written from the male perspective. You know? Because for me, the book is a comment on what I see as male fragility. When I was doing sociology or whatever in school, I remember reading this article about, the article was saying that something about the marginalization of men in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and the matriarchal societies and all of that. And you have to come back to this point where you ask yourself, who is raising these men? Women. Because very often you do have absent fathers or whatever. Who's raising these men? What is it that is making men so fragile that you can't leave them? You know what I mean? Without a response of violence. And so talking about parenthood and talking about like Omar's mother, her relationship with him and fatherhood, and you know, Luther is a good father. Sometimes good fathers have to make hard decisions. So just asking questions, I don't have the answers, but just asking questions about the way we parent boys. That's what I was trying to do there.
If we come back to Celeste's comparison of an island to a prison, and if we think about if I were in a prison, how would I behave? Would I behave well so I could get released early? Or would I be the biggest bargain so nobody would mess with me? And I think I was thinking about characters in Hungry Ghosts, not exclusive to the men in there, but that includes Marley Chango as well. How exactly will you behave to get what you want? Because a lot of the characters in here are quite performative in bringing out masculinity when it suits them. And I see the twins as doing that, where the twins, just to give a bit of backstory, their father's a kind of Boise sing figure, and the mother doesn't speak English, so she's not really allowed to speak. And one of the twins, Rustam, he mimics his father a lot, but he's very brash, he's very loud, and he has a lot of threats of violence. We never had to see him commit any. And the other brother, Rudra, he seems to mimic his mother. He doesn't speak at all, as if, you know, he is in reverence of his mother and nature in that way. Hans, who is the patriarch of the barrack, is I see him as quite performative, and which makes him a quite elusive figure coming midway to the end, because we really don't enter his mind. We don't know what's going on with him, and he seems to employ masculinity when it suits him, where he has to be like this strong figure in the barrack where everybody has to like him. He has to repair everything. But when it comes to actually defending the house, he's an absolute failure at it. When it comes to being devoted to his wife, it can be seen as a failure. And halfway through the book, he becomes the child figure, and his son Krishna becomes the father figure, in a way, because his son takes care of the mother. So they kind of swap masculine roles. Marley, who's not masculine, but I see her as also being quite performative, and I was thinking, like, if we use this prison imagery, how would you behave as if you were trapped in a prison? And sometimes you might vacillate between, as I said, being like the biggest badger on there, or being goody-goody so that you can get what you want, and you would be able to flip between that very, very easily. So I see like Marley, where she's in the mansion, that is like a gilded cage for her, and the barrack is like itself a prison of rust and steel and disease. So in terms of masculinity, or even femininity, they use that, I see them using it as tools. Yeah.
I can see that, and you also portray that so beautifully with both Hans and Marley literally putting on different uniforms to direct themselves to different parts of those roles. But there are also such moments of tenderness, for example, between Rudra and Rustam too, right? The performing particular sort of the threat of violence, even though, as you say, we rarely actually see it happening, but the possibility for these tender moments of care coming from figures that contain the threat of violence. So it was a very, for me, I found this to be a landscape that was particularly nuanced on both of your parts. We have maybe just a little bit more time before I'll open up to the rest of you. So I wanted to also talk about one last thing that I noticed. Both of your books had these wonderful moments of denouement with wakes, with big, spectacular scenes that big things happen. And so maybe we could, and it got me thinking as well about Christina Sharp's idea of living in the wake, like living in the aftermath of slavery, of indentureship, of colonialism. So was there something in particular about, and this is of course tied to some of the themes that Ayana and Jan's work was leading us to think about earlier too, but is there something about wake culture, about mourning, about the wake work that we do with Caribbean literature that was influencing some of the ways in which you were composing these stories?
These are like wakes of, like dead wakes, right? Okay, right.
Yeah, dead work.
Right. So when I in Sunny Ladu's No Pain Like This Body, about half the book is set during a week, and I thought that was such a fabulous set piece for the characters, because there's a reason why you don't find much films that's about wakes, but you find a lot about weddings, because there's a lot of emotions that are just laying bare on the table, and a lot of decisions, and a lot of regrets, and a lot of ambitions. And with wakes in particular, there's something that I wanted to explore with it, because every time that a wake is mentioned in Hungry Ghosts, there's always alcohol involved. There's always, it almost seems like against the person's will. Like they hold the rum bottle against her and just pour massive amounts of alcohol to drown out everything. Yeah. The emotions are so raw, and the grief is so laying bare, that it seems that the people involved in the story are not given an opportunity, because there's so many people around, and there's so much going on and so much busyness, that what should feel like community and communal care almost seems like they become a shroud for the grief. And that in the beginning of the book, where Shweta, the mother, she has a dead daughter named Hema, and they've never really gotten to grieve over this child. And they said that she's become akin to a hungry ghost, where she has almost come back to haunt their daily life, their sex life, and is almost past the point of communication by now. And with having wakes, and we revisit the wake near the end of the book, there's a sense of unexplored grief, or not getting the proper time to grieve, is what I really wanted to do with Hungry Ghosts.
The story with the wake, Santi Maniti, was one of the last ones. It's not the last, but it was one of the last ones I'd written, and it was written very deliberately, because at one point I considered ending the book with that story. And
see how that would have worked beautifully. Because
you've visited Pleasantview, you've met all these disparate characters, and they're separate but connected problems. And I thought a communal event would be a good place to have everybody, be in the same place and so. And so that was the first thought. And then the story starts with a sort of Miss Ivy making a distinction between the very genteel wakes that are happening up the hill and the wake that is about to happen down in the village, right?
The people's wake,
the people's wake. And she says, we have our own ways to mourn. And that's what it is. So I called my father, who was born and spent most of his life, he grew up in Moruga. And Moruga is known for a lot of things. So among them is, that whole superstitious magic side. And I asked him, Daddy, what is a wake like? What was a wake like when you were growing up? you know, and he told me and whatever, and I was taking notes. And I kind of fed that kind of village wake experience into that story. And I wanted it to be on many layers a mourning. So it's a mourning. It starts off, the people think they're there to mourn a particular character, but then it changes, like the spirit of the mourning changes as the story goes along, and they actually end up celebrating that he's no longer with them. And it becomes a mourning, a very personal, non-community, but non-communal, but a very personal mourning on the part of Miss Ivy for what she's been through, yeah? So it's almost like the spirit of mourning and how it manifests.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to put your two reflections together, because Kevin, what you were saying about the wake and the space of the alcohol, especially as a way of trying to numb the rawness of the emotions, you show a kind of moment where it crescendos for Miss Ivy, where she's finally able to say the unspoken thing, right? The thing that still continues to be unspoken. Although I love the image of the inverted or the perverse baptism of the coffin water flooding over Marley in the end. So I think for me, the last thing that I'll say before I open it up is just to say, you both write in such a beautiful way about things that are so intimate to life in Trinidad, things that are recognizable to so many people who live here or live in the region or come from the region. I just wonder about how you're finding the reception in spaces outside of the region, especially as you write, Kevin, about this very specific circumstances around barrack lives, as you write about these complicated migration stories that are moving between the diaspora back in the region and so on. Have there been things that have surprised you about your receptions from audiences here at home and those abroad?
I keep away from a lot of feedback unless it's someone speaking to me personally. But when it's in my own thought process, like I mean, there's a sort of split personality, schizophrenia sometimes that I used to have when writing about Trinidad. I'd be like, write about something like, will Americans understand this word? Will they, should I write this? And then I just, at a point, stopped caring and found like kind of devices to work them in seamlessly. But in a sense, I stopped caring about it because as speaking to somebody, I was like, how do I know what beef stroganoff is? How do I know what sashimi is when I was 12 years old? I mean, I saw it or read it in a book or saw it in a film, and it's just through cultural osmosis. And if people reading like my book and seeing Bygone Choke and be like, what was that? I never hear about it. Yeah, it's a Google. You can look it up. The internet is there. That's it. And the more it's out there, yeah, the more the story is out there, the more the story will be of the world. So that's how I see it. Yeah.
Yes, I spent the first 2 years of serious writing when I was studying creative writing, worrying about that. Worrying about what is the happy medium, where do I strike a balance so that both of my audiences, because I did my thing in the States, and of course, I would present things for workshop, and the feedback I would get would show me that, yeah, a lot of people won't understand, right? But I am grateful for that time because it helped to work that anxiety out of me, and in some ways to develop devices, which is what Kevin is saying, how to convey meaning in context and those kinds of things. And I also reached a point where I do not care. I don't care. And in this book, I didn't care. The other one, I care even less. It's like, good luck. Read it if you want to. Because I agree. I mean, I had to grow up reading British literature, and like, I don't even know I didn't know what a scone was until I was an adult. And like clotted cream, what is that? You know, but you get
delight.
by. Turkish delight, yeah. So if I'm doing my job correctly, you will get a sense. And if you do your job correctly as a reader, you will do the work.
Fantastic. All right. So let's turn it over to you readers now for your questions, your comments, for anything you wanted to pick back up from our conversation or new avenues we haven't explored.
Hi, everyone. Love that question in the end because that was going to be my question I was going to ask. I read these 2 books, and I can say, as a Jamaican who's been living in Trinidad, it literally captures Trinidad culture, history, and it gives such a great glimpse into what life is, even in the contemporary setting and back in the historical setting that you wrote about. And I just want to say, every Trini, every person who's in diaspora needs to read these 2 books because they're magnificent and brilliant, and it's such a great piece of work that both of you did. So just congratulations on those amazing works.
Thank you for that. Anyone have another comment or question that you'd like to offer? Over here.
Thank you. So good job. Congratulations on your fantastic books. I'm going to ask a craft question. I want to know, what did you learn about the process of writing in the course of writing, or in the aftermath of writing both books? I'm calling them novels, Celeste, because yours is a story. Is novels in story. It's still a novel for me, right? So I just want to learn what was the biggest, thing that you learned from that process.
You said craft question, not crap question, right? Craft question. I'm just playing. For me, because this is the first time I've really been dabbling in historical fiction, one thing that I learned is that there's too much research. There's too much. Because I got so much information from documents and from interviewing people, especially elderly people, that I felt very guilty for not including a lot of it in the book, and ended up chopping like a good 30 to 40,000 words in the book, because I just wanted to include everything to the point where it became quite overladen and quite heavy, and I was reminded gently to stick with the plot. There, stuff not running away. The other research could be used for something else. But that's something that I had to learn, that there's such a thing as too much research, trying to be too real, rather than just trying to focus on, well, this is a novel, as a fiction novel. And if some historian comes up, that didn't happen, well, there's some liberties that could be made, yeah.
You said craft, right? A craft question. I think what I learned from when Pleasantview began life as my thesis, it was 6 stories then, to what it ended up being, I think the craft thing that I learned was how important it is to allow yourself to be criticized, to find people who you trust, who you trust and who they hold you in very high regard, they respect your work, and they want you to do the best possible, and humble yourself enough to be criticized, and criticized harshly. When I say harshly, I don't mean in a like a bad way, and in time I have grown to love hearing back from my editor, to love I cringe. It's like, it's schizophrenia. I'm like, I don't know if to be happy or not, but I look forward to it because I know, I tell him, be very hard on me. The harder you are on me, I might not agree with everything that you say, I might not incorporate everything that you suggest, but it will come out a better book after, you know, I subject myself to your criticism.
Great. Is there another comment or question?
Hi, afternoon, everyone. Just to say, so I've read Celeste's book. I'll read the other book soonest. Just to say, Celeste, you know, thank you so much for telling us these stories. When I read the book, I said, this book is for my mom to read. She doesn't probably read as much as she wants to. Give it to her. She read it in a day. And she also says, whenever she sees like an ad for a cloth store, she says, oh, I think about the guy in the book, I think about Mr. H, you know? And from my own perspective, I think just tying back to the last question about writing exclusively about Trinidadian and regional things, specifically with respect to dialect. So I grew up in a home where you'd get both of you spoke dialect, right? But I think the dialect was just so captured so precisely. My favorite line is from the first story. Me and whole house is closed early on a Thursday. Because this is how we speak. And if you want to tell our stories, the best way is to say it the way we speak.
Thanks for that. And it's true. I grew up in a household where I would get in trouble if I spoke dialect at home, right, or Creole. I would get in big trouble. And actually, when I was writing, six months was the first story, I tried to write the narrative voice in the Creole. And while I was writing it, I was like, I felt like my mother was standing over the desk, and like, is that how I raised you? But honestly, again, my editor saved the day, because he read that piece and he said to me, Celeste, it's either you go all in or you don't bother at all. And I realized I had to take my socio-economic hang-ups off the table and let the character speak in the way that the character would most fluently speak. And when I was able to do that, then everything just kind of flowed, you know. So it was a journey for me, especially coming from law, where we speak the oldest English possible. But yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it, so thank you.
Anybody else? All right, well, one thing to say, Celeste, is if there is an audiobook version of it, please, you must be the person to read your own work, because you do that beautifully. Well, I want to thank both of you for spending time with us today, talking through these themes, talking through questions of craft, talking through your inspirations. It's been wonderful for me. Hopefully it clarifies a little bit about why these two things were put together so thoughtfully by the Bocas team. Tomorrow, I believe, Celeste, you're in conversation with a few others around the short story specifically. Kevin on Sunday afternoon is going to be talking about the legacy of Sonny Ladou's work. There's a new biography out by Chris Laird of him. And both authors are available after for book signing right out here. And both books are also outside available for purchase. So thank you so much to the Bocas team for their hard work. Thank you for your presence this afternoon. And we'll see you tomorrow for another full day.